this audit committee meeting. Can I welcome particularly John Roberts from Waverley. On to the agenda. First item, minutes of the last meeting. Anybody, any comments on the minutes? Can we confirm that they are correct? Agreed. Agreed, thank you. Agenda item 2 is apologies for absence. Have we any apologies on you?
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies from Councillor Michaela Gray.
Just as a point of protocol, I'm very happy for Christian names to be used in addressing each of those. Members be happy with that?
Absolutely.
I think it actually allows people perhaps to speak a bit more freely than might otherwise. Just a personal view. Okay?
So you happy we address you as Peter rather than
Absolutely.
Ken? Okay. Well, if you wish, we will.
I think we have to say first names these days. We might not all be Christians.
That is very true. First names.
And be mindful of the fact there are 2 Richards.
Oh.
Okay. Next item is disclosure of interests. Amy, have we had any declarations as such?
None before the meeting, Chairman.
Thank you. Item 4 is the questions by members of the public. Have we had any?
None received.
No, thank you. Questions from members?
Also none received,
None
Chairman.
received, thank you. Okay, the annual audit letter is the next item. John, would you like to present the report?
Absolutely, yes. And first really is to say I'm very pleased to be here, very pleased to be working with the council. Sort of arrived in slightly unusual circumstances because I think because of the there was a family relationship between a politician in the council and one of our members of our London audit team. To make sure that there was no conflicts of interest, we had to separate that from the delivery of the audit. So I'm actually an audit partner based in our Bristol office, but I do spend a lot of my time in London working on some of the sort of the national roles that I have. One of those is I'm head of audit quality for Grant Thornton's public sector team, and the other one is I'm head of public policy for Grant Thornton in audit. But it's a little bit unusual, and you tell me from my accent that I'm not a local. Nevertheless, I very much look forward to working with you. So this is my first committee meeting. The annual audit letter is a summary of the audit work that was undertaken over the course of the last audit year. You would have had a detailed presentation at the July meeting of this committee which covered our audit findings report. Now that report by its nature has to be undertaken at a certain point in time, and things do move on in the completion of the audit, and this annual audit letter brings all those up to date. But it also does summarise and rehearse a lot of the material that the committee will have already been familiar with. So that's the nature of the document. Its purpose really is it's meant to be a user-friendly, more accessible summary of the whole audit for the council to use as part of its communication through the minutes of this meeting as to how it's fared over the course of the external audit. It was a very successful external audit. We were able to issue our opinion on the accounts and the value for money conclusion by the target date of the 31st of July. That was a particular challenge for auditors this summer. I believe the statistics show that I think about over 50% of audits weren't delivered at that point. So this council getting its audit in a complete state at that point is an achievement. 2 other achievements were that the opinions were unqualified. So again, that's evidence of the quality of the accounts that are prepared, but also evidence of the relationship that we quickly built up with officers over the final accounts process, because we did have to cope with a couple of sort of last minute speed bumps, and I'll sort of come back to those in the document. But within a very short space of time, we were able to respond to these issues, clear them, agree amendments to the final accounts, and that left us in the position that we were in to issue unqualified opinions. Now, what were these speed bumps then? Well, the first was the MacLeod judgment, which was a national issue that came out of the woodwork pretty late on in the process. It's related to a legal case where the courts held that there'd been potential age discrimination in the application of the judges' pension scheme, but that would have implications for the local government pension scheme as well. That resulted in the actuarial valuation needed to be re-performed, which it was. Various amendments were made to the council's accounts as a result of it. And we dealt with that really as part of a national issue. All councils were affected by it. In some cases it wasn't material, so amendments weren't required. In your case, amendments were made. Now, these are technical accounting estimates of the defined pensions liability, which don't actually impact on the council as of now in the short term. There could well be a financial impact on the council further down the line as a result of this legal judgment against it, but that won't work through until the actuary has performed the triennial valuation, reset contribution rates through the overall pensions fund, and there will be various other things going on that's impacted on the actuary's valuation at that particular point in time as well. So I expect there'll be financial consequences of it. Don't know at this stage how significant they're likely to be, but they will work through in the course of time.
Sorry, please interrupt. When you say the pension fund contribution, that is from the council into the pension fund?
Yes, that's right, yes. Yeah. It's the IAS 19 liability, so yeah.
Thank you.
Then the other two speed bumps were also technical in nature, and these don't have a direct bearing on the financial position of the council, but nevertheless they still needed to be addressed. And they both were related to the valuation of property, plant and equipment. In these cases, on the one case, it was the buildings index that had been used for the leisure centres. There were some data issues with that we needed to work through, and that was picked up and amended. And the final point was the point in time that the valuer valued the HRA properties, and again our audit identified that there had been probably gone on for a number of years really. There'd been a sort of an error that was being carried there, so we needed to unpick that with officers in order to get to the current position. I think these points are, and particularly the HRA one is a good example of where a fresh pair of eyes comes to an audit and re-examine something that predecessors had looked at, and then maybe sort of teases out some different elements to it, which is one of the benefits of audit rotation. So as I say, it was a successful audit. We concluded the certificate as well, signed off the audit as complete. The only other thing I need to bring out in the document is audit fees. There has been a lot of attention through audit regulation about audit quality, about audit sufficiency, particularly in the corporate sector. If you go back to Carillion, British Home Stores, Patisserie Valerie is a case in point as well. And there's a lot of refocusing of audit work and extending the amount of audit work in order to provide greater levels of confidence and audit quality. The public sector is no exception to that, but we've also been working to sort of mitigate against any impact of audit fee increases. So you'll see in the document, we had been planning to issue our audit fees to give a 23% fee reduction. The fee reduction that eventually works through is about 10%. that compares to the corporate world where we're actually getting fee increases of between 20 and 30% across the largest audits. But it's still public money, and it's still something that we treat very seriously. The monitoring and agreement then of the fee process is undertaken by the contracting body that we work to, which is Public Sector Audit Practice Limited, PSAA. They actually own the fee, so they will be looking at all of these fee variation proposals that auditors will be putting through across the country this year, and they will be seeking support for those variations to ensure their reasonableness, and they will authorise them or not, as the case will be. So the final determination of the fee is not down to ourselves as the auditors, it's not down to the council, although we need to make sure that you are aware of the background to it, but it will be determined by PSAA under its statutory function.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the fees, does that represent an increase about what the council expected to pay when you first started?
It's an increase on what you expected to pay, but a decrease on what you paid last year. So there's been a contract tendering round, so we went under new contracts this year, and we priced it, as did other firms, to equate to about a 23% fee reduction. But we priced those tenders prior to all the things that have been going on in the audit world. So it was before Carillion, before select committees, but before all those, that sort of attention. So since then, the regulator has particularly been looking at the level of audit inputs and wants to see auditors doing more work in some key areas of the accounts. And that's why we've been responding through the regulator.
But presumably issues like McLeod has been known for some time, so you were aware
Well,
of
the
that.
McLeod is non-recurring. The other work around the HRA fee adjustment, valuation adjustments and so on, that would be non-recurring if in future years we don't identify any particular issues. There will be an element of underlying increase from the 23% reduction, but not to the extent in this document.
Graham, can I ask whether is the council happy with the fee arrangement?
So John and I had a long conversation about a week or so, a couple of weeks back around it, and I've written to the PSAA, as John described, the commissioning body for most local authorities decided to go that route rather than tender themselves. So I've written to them just to ask for some clarification mainly around process. I certainly think the element around the housing revenue account valuation, that was an oversight at our end. That's part of this. What I've asked PSAA for is confirmation that they, or two things really. Firstly, confirmation that they recognise the issues. Now, I know the answer because they'll say yes, they do. But I'm disappointed they didn't enter into a dialogue with us and the other 400 councils who procure their audit services through them, to say, just a heads up, there's the McLeod, there are these other things that are coming through from the Financial Reporting Council where we're asking, or they're asking the auditors to ramp up their efforts in the light of material issues happening in the audit world right now. Now they've just been silent, and that's been a bit disappointing, so I have written to them about it, and I'll wait for their response. As John said, I mean, I think any fee variation to the fixed fee ultimately needs to be agreed anyway by PSAA. But I've gone straight to them to gauge their reaction and see what they say about the specific items on there. So I haven't heard back, but as soon as I do, I'll digest that and share that. It was only beginning of last week I went back to them, so they're probably getting these queries from quite a few.
I suspect they
Probably because there will be additional charges, I'm sure, coming through for those. Not the HRA reason necessarily. That's very local for us, but certainly the two FRC points and the McLeod. I think there'll be lots of local authority sites who are having discussions with auditors at the end of their audit, saying, okay, I wasn't expecting to be billed for those. That's something that's going on nationally. And if the PSA said, well, that is a reasonable charge and here's our guidance on it, then we will look at that.
Okay, so that's ongoing.
It
Until
is
you get that
not
guidance.
concluded yet.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, can I ask you a question, please?
Okay.
Dr. In terms of pensions and the work that's got to be done to look at sort of what the future impact of that, what's the plan for that?
For
Well,
the
in terms of, we've now got this new judgment where, you know, you've got, I think it's sort of stagger, it's sort of the back end of someone's employment, from what I remember from the last meeting.
Mm.
So how will we actually do that actuarially in terms of assessing what that's going to mean for the council? Because obviously it's not going to be a free thing, is it? It's going to cost us money.
Okay, so the McLeod judgment had an impact on the actuarial assessment of
Yeah.
pension funds. Now, Waverley Borough Council is a member body of the Surrey Pension Fund, and they use Hyman's
Yes.
actuaries
Yeah.
to do that. So what happened earlier in the year when this all came to light through discussions with our auditors, and we coordinated this through my opposite numbers at the other Surrey authorities as well, we went back to Hyman's and said you need to revalue taking account of the outcome of the McLeod judgment, and reissue us with an up-to-date set of assumptions that we can plough through the accounts.
Sure.
So we had to pay them. It wasn't a huge amount of money. It was a couple £100 or something. So it took them very long to rehash their model. Then we got a new set of figures which we ploughed through the accounts. So that should be a one-off reset. That shouldn't reoccur now. So I think the outcome of McLeod is now built into our actuarial assessment
Models,
that we get
okay.
from Hyman's. We don't actually have any influence on the model itself, or indeed on the assumptions, other than, you know, we can engage with our actuary at any time. Because it's a statutory scheme, that the council don't have any discretion about the component parts of the pension fund scheme, and Hyman's work to their own, you know, codes of practice and
Sure.
etc. around it. But you know, so the timing was unfortunate because of course we were all well underway with our audits, and but you know the fear was that we would have a material adjustment to make that we didn't reflect in the accounts. Potentially that could lead to misstatement, qualification issues. So we all had to go through that and then make those adjustments.
Okay.
So does that answer the question?
Yeah,
Jo?
that's
'Cause,
fine.
yeah, that's where we are with the actuary on it. I'm hoping that we don't have a recurrence of this next year or beyond.
Any other questions for?
Is the performance of our accountants exceptional in this? I mean, when you look at an audit, the maximum benefit of the audit is not in policing us, it's actually providing learning opportunities to make things even better next year. And you know, there's actually not a lot of learning opportunities out of this, except we've got a great set of accountants.
Yeah, positive, very positive. And as I said in my preamble, the attitudes as well were very positive. So the accountancy team didn't get everything right. So the HRA evaluation was something that needed to be addressed. But they responded very positively, short notice, quite difficult technical things to sort of turn around, and worked well with my audit manager in doing that. So I thought that was something of real merit as well.
I mean, how many other councils compare with this performance? You know, is this really exceptional, or is it where it should be for the better end of it?
A minus, B plus.
That's harsh. Okay, thank you.
I'll always encourage future improvement. No, but very good. Top end.
Okay. We were struck with having to do a rather rushed audit because of the conflict of interest. Are we okay to start a little bit earlier next year?
Yes, well that will be our plan. Yeah, our plan and
It'll
of
be the
course.
same team.
Yes.
So they'll have a degree of understanding
Yeah.
to be able to move.
Yeah, so certainly myself and Laura and the sort of the leaders of that team wouldn't. Yeah. And we didn't, as a point, as an aside, we didn't reflect any charge in for any additional time that we spent actually getting up to speed and redoing something.
Appreciate it, thank you.
I'm assuming that Brexit will have no effect on the accounts in future years.
In future years, probably not in your case, no. Depends on how indirectly you start to go with Brexit, isn't it? No, I couldn't see any absolute direct impact on your accounts, and certainly in the next year.
Stu? I'd just like to say I was very impressed with the job that was done rushed. When I came to the meeting when it was presented, I thought everybody worked very hard and very efficiently, so I'd like to give my thanks as
Yeah, we'll all endorse that. Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much, John.
Okay.
Graham, at this point, can I just ask you a question? It's to do with the audit findings. At our last meeting, we discussed the audit findings of the report. I think it was dated, well, our meeting was the 22nd of July, but the updated audit findings report is dated the 31st of July. So how do we sort of link that to the documents we have already effectively agreed?
Oh yes, so the one that was agreed at the committee meeting, because we knew there was still some work to do, and I think Laura at the meeting advised that there was still some work. There was a delegation given from the committee to I think to you and I, Jen, to wrap that up. Yes. We were happy with that, and then so in the end the opinion was given on the 31st, and therefore the final audit findings report was dated the 31st, and that was signed off under the delegation. So in terms of sort of records and paperwork, anything signed off under a delegation on any of Waverley's committees, there's a matter, there's actually a paper record kept of that with signatures on that you and I signed. I mean, it's called grey sheets because they happen to be grey bits of paper. It sounds a bit antiquated. But so there was a record kept that we were satisfied that the changes made could be signed off under the delegation given by the committee. Because if we weren't, we were prepared to have another meeting, and then we would have been one of the 50% who didn't get over the line in time. I think the nature of it and the acceptance of the changes from working with Lauren and John's audit manager, then we were able to get there. So, does that answer your question?
Yes, so just what the process was.
That squared the dates up, I think,
Okay, thank you.
because we were operating under the delegation when we signed off the final version.
Mr. Chairman, I know I received notification from you that it had been done, and I'm sure all the other members of the committee did, so...
No, it's just a question of document control, basically, how that's
Yes.
folded in.
Absolutely. Hopefully the one on our website is the 31st of July one. I can quickly Google it in a minute when it goes, because it should be the final one. So the earlier version was the one subject to the committee meetings discussion. The final version should be the one that we put our official notice out to tell the public about the conclusion of the audit actually on the 31st. I will check this out.
And we have a recommendation on the audit letter. It's recommended that the audit committee receives and notes the annual audit letter. Is that agreed? Very good. Thank you. Okay, next item 7, audit committee annual activity report. Pages 21 to 30. Do we have any comment on this?
I'll go a couple up to the chair.
Suzanne?
Good. On page 22, where we're looking at standing items, I mentioned this at the last one, it would be really helpful if we look down notable items considered during 2018-19 included. So we're told, for example, officers reassured the committee that work was underway behind the scenes to implement these changes. It would be terrific just to have the word confirmed when that's done before we get these papers. Because immediately I go to that and think, well, is it still underway? Has it been done? So unless I'm missing it somewhere else. And exactly the same with the anti-money laundering training. It says this would coincide with the committee receiving an updated anti-money laundering policy at its March meeting, which I'm assuming is this March, just gone. So again, my question was, supported it? So it's that sort of thing. I think that it just asks, it leaves the question hanging in the air for me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
So thank you for your comment. We'll tidy that up.
Okay, thank you.
Amy, should we
I'm sure
go
these
that
all
afterwards?
have been done, but yes,
Yes.
we can definitely confirm that for
Thank
you.
Yeah, that'd be useful. Yeah.
It's just in terms of,
Yeah, I
closing
see
that point
definitely
off.
what you mean about closure.
yes, exactly, thank you.
Okay.
Any other comments? I have a couple of points. I noted earlier on, I spoke to Amy about the tax. Tax issue, the tax item that was covered in last year, but doesn't appear in the current work programme. I think Amy, you found this is an annual requirement,
Tax strategy. So,
Yeah.
tax strategy.
I just dug out the document and it does say that it'd be reviewed periodically and it does say annual, so we can certainly add that to the work programme if that's,
And in the opposite direction, in the internal audit charter, which we're doing this year, has a 2-year recurrent.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean to say you have to keep to 2 years.
Yeah.
Is there a reason having it this year as well? Next
No,
year
because
as well,
generally
so-
what the charter was given to this committee because the committee being new, so that they were opening up the contents of the charter. Because I think the wording is I look at the charter every year
Yeah.
and I may make changes, but it comes to, if there's any changes requiring endorsement by the audit committee, it can then come to the audit committee. But generally the review period would, in actual fact, once it's set, would not actually be biannual.
Okay, yes, thank you.
I've got another question as well, Chair. 1.3 on page 23, annual governance statement, consideration of emerging governance issues. The first paragraph concludes something along the region that, the audit committee is required to formally review governance. And it is the last line of the first paragraph under that item. So there should be a standing item at each meeting where members would be invited to discuss any governance issues that they felt were of significant merit. And again, do we do that or?
it is on the agenda. For
It is,
this
that's,
meeting.
yeah, thank you very much. Thank
That's item 13 on the agenda.
Thank
So there's no papers for that. It's
It's just
that's the opportunity
just
for
a
members
standing
to.
item. Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, can we look at the recommendation? It is recommended that the work carried out by the audit committee in 2018-19 be noted. Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 8 is the internal audit charter, pages 30 and 42. Gary, do you mind
Yes.
introducing something?
This is, as the Chairman's just explained, this is internal audit charter. I review the charter every year, but it comes to the audit committee every second year. But due to the new audit committee, I felt it was prudent for the audit committee to have a view of what the current charter is, and enable them to actually make any comments that maybe they may wish to be incorporated into the charter. The contents confirm what is expected of me, how the audit, the internal audit team sits within the organisation, and what we are responsible for, and the scope and the outputs that are provided by the internal audit service.
Any questions on this document?
Yeah, if I may. This is a well-established, tried and tested document, and I guess the stuff highlighted in yellow is the
Yes,
change.
the minor changes.
Yeah, I'm struggling with this in that if I look at an organisation, I can't think of anyone less independent from the findings of audit than the chief executive. It would seem to me that maybe the borough solicitor or the democratic services team probably don't have much specific interest in the things being found challenging with the operation, but surely the boss is probably should be more concerned than anyone else in the organisation, and therefore is probably the least independent person we've got. I don't know what colleagues think about that.
Well,
but,
I couldn't agree more. It seems to be a contradiction in terms that the chief executive safeguards the independence of the internal.
Absolutely.
That's just a non-sequitur, if you like, as far as I'm concerned.
I totally agree.
It's just wrong, I would have thought.
It doesn't feel right, does it? It certainly doesn't feel right to have the fox looking after the hen.
No, that's a very good, yeah, exactly.
It's
right.
difficult because no one's truly independent.
Yes.
But in terms of independence, I would have thought Democratic Services or the Borough Solicitor probably have less.
Or in conjunction with a member of the council.
Can I just ask what paragraph are you referring to?
So on
Page 39.
page 39 is your page
Item
39, foot of paragraph 9.
It's the new section you added.
Unless it means,
On the highlighted area where the
Yeah.
chief executive reviewing and countersigning, that's my performance review.
You know exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, this was deemed appropriate because with the knowledge of the Section 151 officer, because the Section 151 officer, obviously, I have to be line managed by somebody, and therefore that independent view of the chief executive is deemed to be appropriate to actually give that overview of overall as to my role, as to what I'm fulfilling. Yeah.
I mean, I understand the principle, I just
It's
dispute that.
No, I mean, these things absolutely must need to be looked at every now and again. And the same point John made about sort of circulating auditors, sometimes you get a new committee looking at things in a different way. I think if members of this committee have any concerns about the sort of structural lines, then please air those, because that could be changed. I mean, Gail reports to me, and I'm not independent, arguably. I mean, most of the areas that Gail audits come somewhere within my remit, but then it's either me, Annie, or Tom. So getting that sort of separation is quite challenging in a massive organisation. And the structure we have at the moment is that Gail reports to me as line manager, but there's this sort of dotted line to the chief executive. But I completely understand what you say around independence. Now, our monitoring officer reports to the chief executive as well, which is Robin. So at some point we'd have to settle somewhere where we're satisfied that you
can't get complete independence.
you can achieve it as much as possible. Yeah. Exactly.
I just think
But as far as this particular function is concerned, that just seems to be... As a statement, it seems to be entirely... It's a contradiction in its own terms, if you see what I mean.
I mean, some organisations would actually have a dual sign, so you have two people that review it and do it that way.
Going to ask is,
Yeah,
don't
so you
want
have
to
the...
commercial organisations do with their internal audit manager?
Well, probably wouldn't be to the level of chief executive, certainly. So I can see the value there, not just from the independence perspective, but in terms of value in audit, to demonstrate the importance of that. And I guess that as well, to bring in about the nature of a statutory officer, because the chief executive is the statutory officer as well. I think it would be appropriate, from that perspective too.
just wonder, Mr. Chairman, if we're reading too much into this. Is it the performance of the job holder as opposed to the performance of the internal audit?
The
You
results
see
of
what I
the
mean?
audit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is your performance
It's my
that's being
performance.
reviewed. It's not the actual internal audit.
It's not the
So he's
internal audit.
actually countersigning
Yes.
and probably asking you if you feel you're pressured by anybody if he's doing his job properly. And so I think maybe a rewording rather than a complete change might be the answer.
I think as well for you to be assured then that the performance of internal audit is within this committee's remit, isn't it? I would expect it to be.
Well, and you'll exercise that through the next few reports as you go through the audit plan. But so I think so this comment is specifically about, in effect, the appraisal of Gail's appraisals, but
Yeah.
it is under the heading of independence and objectivity. So I do understand where councillors are coming from in terms of. So I think the comment itself maybe isn't as concerning as the fact that there is a direct link to the chief executive. So I do understand
Yeah, I wouldn't want anyone to think, well, certainly from my point of view, that there was any implication of impropriety or any criticism implied at all. But there is this sort of, it's like this sort of divine right of chief executives. Sort of, well, they're infallible. Therefore, the statement that the fact that he countersigns the internal, the performance review by virtue of his exalted position, and as I say, his divine right, renders it, immediately independent. And
I think
I think maybe there could be a happier way of expressing the same thing. I would have thought.
Can I suggest, Simon, if the safeguarding component is just removed?
It is, that's that word, isn't
Yeah.
it?
So safeguarding onwards, and then the performance review, which is just
Jerome, that may well be. There may be a well. There may may
that
well
seems
be
to be the issue.
a term, a way of expressing that in a slightly more happy way. I would think, perhaps.
Yeah.
Chair, after you.
Yes, John.
I was going to say, to me it's the word countersigning, because I don't know how many chief executives can really understand the nitty-gritty of what their individual senior managers are doing, and even if they even want to. So, I mean, that's why I have the issue with that. I mean, it's, if there is a need for the chief executive to get involved just to make sure that there's no duress or anything like that, I can understand that element, but the countersigning of a performance appraisal by someone you have no responsibility to, I don't quite understand how that works in practice.
Chairman, I don't know how much longer you want to on this one, because what I could do then is we could minute that the committee raised this, no discussion around it, and that, I mean, unless you want it back at the next meeting, we could delegate some revised wording to yourself, maybe with myself, to capture the sentiment, but without necessarily restructuring the whole sort of management lines, etc. Because that's where members are.
I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah.
Talk to members about it.
Okay. So maybe we'll Gail and I can draft something and speak to you about it. If you're happy, you could consult with your colleagues in the committee, and then rather than leave ourselves having to come back to the next committee, should we get a delegation to sign that off offline? Does that sound okay?
Okay.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you, Gail, for doing what we asked, the version and bringing the next. That's great. So is that item, that's complete? No more comments? Okay, thank you, Gail. The recommendation is recommended that the audit committee approves the internal audit charter. Are we agreed? Agreed. Progress on the internal audit plan for 2019, 2020. Okay. Do you mind introducing this?
Yes, this is the progress that we've made on we're making on the 2020 audit plan, and I can just confirm the audit plan for 2018-19, which isn't presented because actually all of that has been completed, apart from there is 3 reviews that are in this year's plan, which were, one was deferred by the previous audit, agreed as a deferral by the previous audit committee, which was the community infrastructure levy, because it hadn't yet come on board, and therefore there wasn't an activity to be audited, so therefore that was deferred until this year, which is on page 12. And the property investment review was also a previous year review, and the management of major projects. Now, the property investment one, again, there hadn't been sufficient activity of us buying any new properties, so therefore that was rolled over into this year. And the major management of major projects, that was one due to resourcing difficulty we had at the back end of last year, was rolled into this year. So that's the reason why you haven't got the 18-19. Basically, generally, what would have happened in the July audit committee would have been, The audit committee would have got the tail end of last year's plan, but as that plan in effect has been completed, and we're now working on the 1920 plan. It's just for those that maybe who were audit committee members previously would be aware that they would generally at one point get two plans. So as you can see, the introduction in the report conveys, yes, well, the contractor is working hard to complete reviews, and we did have a member of staff who was working on the team. Unfortunately, that didn't work out. So now we've actually got a shortfall in our resources, and at the moment I'm coming up with a plan as to how we deal with that under-resource, and Graham and I will be coming to conclusion as to how we meet that resource. But at this point in time, we will be going out to advertise again, out to the workplace to get another member of staff on board. But the report in front of you gives you it's on page 6 of the agenda. It's page 50 actually. It's page 50, page 6 of my report, paragraph 4. It gives an analysis of the reviews that have been completed. And you can see where we've had Legionella, gas safety, asbestos and reconciliations. So there have been some interesting reviews completed by the contractor. And on page 5 it gives an executive summary of the outcome of the Legionella review, because it only got adequate or no assurance. Should be limited actually. And with the asbestos one, it gives a flavour of the key observations that the contractor made and the management response to those recommendations. On paragraph 7, it provides you with the rolling work programme and the progress that has been made in the achievement of the plan. On page 56, where we have payroll accuracy and planning benchmarking exercises. These were 2 reviews that were actually added to the plan because the strategic director requested that these reviews be done because there was concerns really on the payroll accuracy. He wanted assurance that things were being done as they should be being done. And the planning benchmarking exercise was requested by the strategic director and the head of planning as part of a benchmarking with other local authorities providing a similar service. Where I have put assurance opinion of advisory, where it does say not applicable regarding or not available, final report, etc., they should in actual fact follow the same sequence of ticks that were included in page 11. So a report has been produced, outputs have been reported and taken on board by the relevant heads of service.
The planning service via BFM, which was the additional review added,
Yes.
is that the same thing as the benchmarking exercise?
Yes.
I guess that at the end of the day you'll have ticks across all of these items. That's the objective, isn't it?
Oh, by the end of
Due
March,
course.
yes. That is the target, shall we say.
And with the problems, do you think you're going to achieve that?
I would hope to think yes, but who knows what will happen. It depends on how quickly we can get the new resource in, but then if we can't get the new resource in quickly enough, we would then in effect hopefully backfill with the contractor to provide the views completed by the contractor. Because it comes down to timeliness and resource budget availability.
and also the availability of the contractor, if you're...
Exactly, and that is
in a
having the
fix, right?
capacity. One of the benefits of the contractor that we do have, it doesn't, the contract we have with the contractor, it doesn't preclude us from actually buying services from other contractors. So it's not an exclusive contract. So that does in actual fact give us that flexibility for circumstances such as this.
Okay. What is the legal implication if you happen not to meet the end of March target?
The audit plan is actually set by us as Waverley. We could in actual fact have a short number of days this year and actually have a higher amount of days next year. There isn't, as far as I'm aware, legal amount of days that we need to have.
Okay, so you've got some flexibility there.
Yes, there is flexibility.
So Chairman, it's a self-imposed target and rather than a legal one, but it is one that I'd expect the audit committee to be watching very carefully for and be concerned if we were drifting for whatever reason. And I would expect the committee to sort of want to talk to Gail on that. I'd like to think we're more proactive than that. I've said to Gail, come up with a resource plan. Look to see in the event that we don't recruit and or we don't manage to secure the resource from the contractor, which are identify the lower priority, lower risk audits that we can sort of slip into a plan B. And again, I was just pulling that together, and we'll come to Chairman and Vice Chairman about that. And so I think we've had really good active engagement with the audit committee on the audit plan over the years, and I'm sure that will carry on. I think you'd be concerned if it was slipping with no sort of justification, and we'd expect you to apply a bit of pressure at that point and be concerned. So hopefully we can have a dialogue way before we ever got to that point.
Next November is when we'll have some plan to present, and hopefully
Sorry?
next November is the
This November. It's,
coming on.
I will be starting to compile round about November for the March audit committee.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for you, Richard?
Yes, please. So the format of the report is very, very different to what we've had in recent years. The format's neither here nor there. I mean, there's the style of the report and there's the substance. This is actually quite easy to follow, but there's stuff missing from here that the previous committee got, which I think is of enormous value, and Graham's effectively alluding to that in terms of what he's going to be asking to be put in place. So we had timing in the report, at each report, when we could expect each of this list of audit items to appear in front of us, sense of priority, was it high, medium or low, and the resource required. And what we've got here makes it a lot less easy for the committee as a whole to make a judgment about how the resource that's available is being set up to cope with the plan for the year. So as I say, how it's actually presented is neither here nor there to me. We've put quite a lot of effort into getting the spreadsheet that we used before in place, but that's for colleagues to make a judgment as to how they want to see it. I'm quite concerned that what we're missing here is timing, priority, and resource requirement, so that the committee has confidence that you can see what's going to come in front of us, and the pressures that you're genuinely under by being one person down.
I think one of the, I agree with what Councillor Seaborn really just said. I wasn't part of the previous council, as you may or may not be aware. But I'm trying not to use the word idiot's guide. This seems to be I'm trying not to use the word superficial either, but a very broad overview of quite a large, a long list of quite difficult, tricky, and important subjects. We don't seem to be given, as Richard said, the resource, the timing, and the priority of sort of information. And I can't see from what we have here how we can track progress against the schedule or that we are looking to achieve. I don't know. This may be, as I say, this may be something that has been produced for councillors to get a broad overview, and there may be internal working documents that that the audit team are working to that do have that sort of information. But unless there's quite a lot more there's quite a lot more detail gone into, I struggle to see how the tasks can be identified as priorities, the resource requirement analysed and made available, and again, as I say, the timing of progress against the schedule that we're hoping to achieve.
Well, I can certainly take your comments on Councillor Seaborn's comments on board with regarding reintroducing or re-putting into the what quarter it's due in, the risk and the resource. No, the format of this report was a way of for the new committee, for it to be I perceived it to be more transparent as to what was actually going on. But yes, you're quite correct, Councillor. I do have a detailed spreadsheet.
Right, so
a much longer version than the one that went to the previous audit committee, and again, that same spreadsheet was provided to the audit committee. But again, the other audit committee, previous audit committee, the comments was, and sometimes it was too comprehensive. And I know some committee members loved it, and other committee members said, well, actually, I find it too complicated, and I can't understand it all. So therefore, this was actually my way of, and I take all blame for it, my way of trying to make it a bit more easier for members to understand what is going on, what is outstanding, and where is the actual audit team. But what I can do, I can take comments on board, and for the next one, I'll then present you with a bit more information for you to
Chair, may I take
Yeah,
that?
sure.
The other thing, actually, for me, the thing that's really missing, apart from all the good things, is really the RAG status on these, because that's the first thing that I look at, is it on track where it should be? So, I don't know if that was on before. So, for example, your scoping and all that, if we've got an indication of which quarter it's in, it's also helpful to know actually whether or not it's going to land in that quarter, or actually, as we've got over the page, a couple of items that won't, what seem to be very, very good reasons. So that I find is particularly helpful, because it's the closest thing I've got to comparing what the current state is to what the previous state was.
Thank you.
So this chart is almost in, say, the right format, because you're ticking the milestones on each line item.
Yeah.
You just haven't got the timeline in there. So that could be a spreadsheet with
It
milestones.
would just be another column added in.
Another row or a row, whatever. Yeah.
That's what it means.
And then you could have two rows, one showing what you've got here with the actual timeline, and the one maybe underneath it with the planned timeline, so you can see the progress.
Do try and keep it, I think we ought to keep it very simple.
Oh, yes.
For us, all of us different people. And I think what you suggested, Richard, to have the end target date, it would be very helpful.
Well, generally,
Rather than just a quarter, it would be nice to see which month it's going to be in, rather it's a little bit more refined than a quarter.
generally by putting a particular date, end date, shall we say, that does make, we can't put an end date in, say actually they're all due by the 1st of March 2020, but in actual fact we do spread it throughout the quarters, because obviously the availability of staff, again you have annual leave in the summer periods, and you have some of our housing benefit systems in effect, they close down for a month before year end, because they have to shut down their systems, so therefore we have to schedule reviews in when appropriate. So that's the reason why generally we put it a quarter rather than actually have an end, a specific date at that point.
So I think, Jan, we picked up on the sort of 2 or 3 items given the RAG rating that members would find beneficial to supplement this, but without extending it too much into a long document. I'm sure we can do that for next time.
And as Richard suggested also, the new resource constraints
Yeah,
resource requirements
the
would be
previous
helpful.
one had a number of auditor days for each line item, and you know, it's really seeing the overall picture. So you know when you're stressed, you know, if you're a few auditor days out in a quarter, you know it's not a major problem.
Yeah.
If you've got 50% more requirement than you've got staff, then you're not going to deliver. And that's really, as a committee, I think we need to look at.
No, no.
Is this one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We could sort of blend, just looking at the previous one, that's all into that. I think we use the,
Yeah.
we use
As I say,
yeah.
to me, there's nothing sacrosanct about the format. Literally, those are just pieces of content, so that we're
Yeah.
better able to judge progress against plan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? There we go. We've got that's recommendation. It is recommended that the committee notes the contents of the internal audit progress report for September 2019 as attached in Annex 1. Are we agreed? Thank you. Item 10, progress on implementation of internal audit recommendations. 66. Gail again.
Okay. You will see here you have the recommendations that were due to be implemented by a particular agreed target date, and that those that haven't yet achieved that target date. I don't know whether I should go through all of them, but actually you can see they're related to two different heads of service, one relating to Waverley Training Services, and the other recommendations relate to a review that was done in our flexi time. And the head of service for both of those recommendations, which you can see then on page 65, have requested that the head of service for the Waverley Training Services has requested an extension to the 31st of October 2019, and this was due to the contractual agreements in the academic year changing, and therefore they weren't able to meet the original target date. So basically a change has been made by a third party, external third party, and therefore he's asked if the audit committee can endorse his extension to the 31st.
And that will then solve that problem if we agreed at that, by that point, by the 31st.
Well, the head of service said it will be, that is the date that he has indicated to the committee.
Chair, may I say something, just very quickly? On page 62, it's the second major block down, which action code and description. It just seems a bit of a governance thing there, doesn't it? Without managers taking responsibility for ensuring staff are claiming hours based on work actually completed, there's a right risk, etc., etc. So my immediate question is, yeah, sure, have whatever extension you need to get it done. But what's, I'm more interested in what's happening now to stop that. And I know they're saying we've got to have the policy and we've got to have the new people coming on before we can do it, but why? I mean, any corporate organisation, you'd be sending out an email immediately saying, these are the terms, we're adjusting the policy, we'll let you have that, but this is what we have to do, and just to reinforce that. And also in terms of the management, I'm getting more into the executive than the audit here, I know, is that you'd actually have something in some of the performance reviews if they weren't doing it, to actually ensure that they do it. So for me, it's a governance issue there, not just, they need the more time. Fine, that happens. And
I think this was my understanding. It was regarding the changes that was going to be made to the policy, because there seemed to be some issue regarding
using it.
Yes,
no, misusing
yes,
it.
yes, but there was an issue that they had to resolve regarding some. I just don't think it was a disciplinary, it was some challenge.
Oh yeah,
Someone had made a challenge
yeah.
on the current policy, and therefore they had to wait the outcome for that to be resolved,
right.
for them to actually establish what changes are going to be made in the policy. Probably taking similar to, like,
sure,
not quite the McLeod effect, but you know what I mean. They had to wait for the outcome of that to actually see what what the effect was then going to be on the new policy.
I mean, I accept that largely. There's nothing to stop the organisation saying to its managers, you need to tighten up on this. Right? We've got the policy in place for that, and if you're not complying with that policy, then we have issues, as you have just seen, by what's going on with this complaint, whatever it was. So, anyway, ranting.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Peter. So yeah, I just totally agree with that. My inclination is, we have to give that extension for it to be done. But I'd be inclined to ask that the responsible manager or head of service comes to our next meeting and gives us assurance that steps are being put in place to ensure that what is a pretty wide-reaching aspect of our HR policy, in fact, is fully under control, whereas clearly the audit demonstrated that it wasn't, and there was a lot of action required.
I just wonder if there is a reason for a hold-up. Surely there's no reason for all the claims to be checked, even if it's as a training exercise.
I think the head of service has decided to have the whole suite together, because again, with those particular recommendations, I noticed he has asked for an extension of 1st of October for recommendations 1 to 4, and then obviously from number 5, actually having a separate target.
I just think that it would be good practice to check it anyway, even if you didn't act on it until you set the policy out. I mean, it's something I would have thought should have been done as a matter of course anyway on flexi time.
Yes, the issue does seem to be, it's the management issue, isn't it? It comes very strongly out of these comments from the staff.
Yeah, I mean, to me, my view, Chairman, is that these should be implemented much sooner and not allowed to carry on. They shouldn't be on your agenda tonight asking the committee for an extension. They should just be done. And I mean, this is the first one of these reports that this committee has seen. Just a bit of history around it. I mean, the audit committee a few years ago felt that they wanted to keep tabs, and obviously Gail at any one point in time has many audits live with recommendations being implemented. Most of them are. The ones that aren't or haven't been or are close to their deadline, it's become good practice, and I really welcome it, to come into the audit committee because there's some learning and some discussion. And it actually helps to reinforce with some of our managers if the audit committee have some sort of pretty strong views, even if you express your disappointment when things haven't been followed up. It's quite powerful actually for us to go back with that. But this is relatively straightforward management stuff that should have been sorted out, and so it shouldn't be on here. But it is, and so I'm hearing the views that I would certainly echo, and we need to get on and sort this out. So I certainly wouldn't recommend an extension beyond 1 month. So.
I can imagine the flexi time policy is probably quite important for staffing. You have difficulty getting people to work in the council, and maybe mothers, let's say, who've got children at school, welcome that to part-time role, part-time activity. So it's important that you've got access to a flexi time arrangement.
Yeah, we've just done a staff survey, and it comes out. Other than people say the people here are great, they love their colleagues. They say the flexibility that we give, but it's the only way we can recruit people. It really is. People at the end of interviews and when we offer them jobs say, right, I do a drop off on them, men, women, mums, dads, grandparents. They'll say, right, can we talk about some flexibility here? And we absolutely drill into our managers. Don't just close it off and say no. Say, let's talk about that, because otherwise these great people just stroll off and get a job somewhere else. It's so hard to get people at the moment. So it's got to happen, but you've got to get the balance right between an overly police prescriptive system that is an industry in itself, and something that's open to abuse because it's too trusting. And so so it looks like we're not quite there yet, and the audit has raised some concerns, and it shouldn't have taken this long for us to address them.
So we can ask Robin to come and talk to us about this.
So Jim, there's a number of ways you can deal with it. You can, it depends if you want to bring a head of service along to a meeting, or whether you want some written assurance from that head of service. And if you're not satisfied with that, then ask them. A number of things have happened in the past, and it depends how strongly members feel about it, as to whether you want to bring them in or just ask them to email you some assurance and then say, yeah, we'd like you to come along and talk about it. I mean, it depends where you sort of put this on the overall importance scale. So, for example, committees have brought Hugh in before when there have been concerns around gas safety checks, etc., which now is sort of completely sorted, but the committee have expressed in person to the head of service their strength of feeling around the governance around it, and that's been really good. Something like this, well, you could just send me off with a very firm message to meet with that head of service. It really depends whether you want to be bringing people, apart from anything, you're wanting this done before your next meeting. So it would be a retrospective reassurance that it has been done.
Chair, may I just, the concern I have is we don't know what we don't know. Okay, so this has slipped. Anything else slipped?
Well, so anything else that slipped should be in this report.
Yeah,
so Gail should capture everything at a point in time.
Okay.
So everything that slipped or is getting dangerously close to its deadline should be in this report, and you pick that up from your monitoring system, don't you, Gail? So there shouldn't be any others in the system that aren't caught by this.
Can I suggest then that if it's not completed within 1 month, that we do see our head of services at our next meeting in November? If only just to explain, if it completes in November, early November, at least you know why he's having problems with getting it implemented.
Absolutely.
And what learning lessons we have from
I think that's very reasonable, yeah.
Yes. Could I also add to that? I'd personally like to know how the flexi time arrangement is implemented, what controls are in place. Just bullet points really, how it actually works.
Okay.
Maybe how many members of staff are on the flexi time arrangements.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
Just basic data.
Well, we can circulate that to members of the committee. So there is a policy which we can send round, and we've got through our HR team some data about who uses that flexibility formally.
I thought it was quite amazing that one of the 25 interviews actually put time off in December. Coincidentally, it was Christmas, but they were clearly able to map where they're going to need their overtime at that point. So I thought, interesting observation.
Okay, thank you, Gail.
Sorry, Chip. Can I just chip in with just one comment about the first of the two items that we've been asked to give extension to. So that seems absolutely reasonable. There's extenuating circumstances. But the comment I made earlier about the big value of audit is actually learning for the future. To me, it would be very helpful if Kelvin Mills could just send the committee a very brief email saying what's going to be done about preventing this from happening again next year. Because it seems a little unwieldy, and it's an annual contract. But since it is an annual contract, we're going to have to go through the same exercise next year, and we don't want to see the same again. Or unless it's already covered in the audit and it was satisfactorily covered, and in which case perhaps the audit report might have the answer in it. I don't know.
I would have to check on that. I think with the ASFA, obviously, I think it would depend on how efficient they are in resolving what they want the contractual terms to be regarding us then subcontracting to a training provider. I think that was, with this one, this was the issue. And what I'm not sure as to how much the ESFA have to wait for central government to then say what changes they're going to make to it, because sometimes I think what these sort of things can be a cascade effect. But as I say,
you're doing Calvin's job.
Yeah,
we'll let Calvin write.
Yeah, well, I think it's
if that's the answer, that's fine. At least we won't get stressed next year when it comes up again.
This is an outside body though, isn't it?
Yes.
We are waiting for, so
Yes,
really
that's right.
bringing pressure on our own staff is not going to do us any good at all.
I'd argue this isn't pressure, it's just asking for
Yes, explanation.
understanding.
Yes, so Calvin, when he, in his exit meeting for the audit report, would have agreed with Gail to delivering the recommendations by a certain deadline. And I think it's perfectly reasonable for us to say to Calvin, well, write to the committee to say how this will not occur. You're not saying how did this occur and that we want a full inquiry. I think you're saying, yeah, let us know, give us some assurance.
You've done everything you can.
You've done everything you can
to happen next year if there are mitigating
Okay.
circumstances. That's fine.
Calvin will be fine with that.
There's no pressure.
No, it's okay.
Thank you. The recommendation on this item, it is recommended that the committee, number one, considers the information contained in Annex 1 and, following discussion at the audit committee meeting, identifies any action it wishes to be taken. And two, considers the head of services justification for a change in the due date for the recommendations listed in Annex 2 and agree an appropriate implementation date. Have you agreed with that? Thank you. Item 11, fraud investigation summary. Guess who?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This report provides the Audit Committee with an overview of the work that the fraud investigator, who predominantly deals with housing and tenancy fraud, and the work that's been completed by that one officer, supported by myself. Now, in the past, the Audit Committee have received Annex 1, which provides, unfortunately I only have quarter 1, but we will get quarter 2 at the next Audit Committee. We were just too early for the Audit Committee. We haven't yet finished quarter 2. And what you can see here, you can see the types of work that's completed, or should I say the types of results that's been achieved by the fraud investigator. And as suggested by previous Audit Committee, I have retained previous year's information at the bottom to give a comparison as to how things have progressed throughout the period since we've had the opportunity to have this role. And I think the contents, as I say, provide the Audit Committee with a flavour of all the reviews and the types of reviews that are completed on behalf of the Council.
John, I think it's worth kind of just very briefly talk about the background to this role, because there was some partnership money floating around for fraud pump priming initiatives a few years ago through Surrey County Council and the Audit Partnership, which we took advantage of, and that paid for this new post for about 2 years. And we decided to focus in on right to buy fraud and tenancy fraud within housing, because the Department of Work and Pensions at that point had centralised housing benefit fraud, and our investigators moved across to work for them. So we no longer do that ourselves, the Department of Work and Pensions do. So at the end of the external funding, Hugh Wagstaff, who runs our housing revenue account, said, well, you know, I'm getting such good value for this post, I want to fund it and carry it on. So put that to council agreed, and then this committee have sort of tracked the progress ever since. And all the time it's still generating good, if you can call them outcomes from fraud work, then I think there's a strong case to continue it. But if at any point, you know, we eliminate fraud from right to buy and tenancy, which is highly unlikely, then we can dispense with the post. But so that's really the history of it. It started off with some external funding, got to the end, Hugh said, this is really working out well. It happens to be that the individual's exceptionally good as well on this, very robust. And so it's a good initiative, completely discretionary, we don't have to do it, but I think it helps to safeguard this scarce resource which is called, you know, council housing owned by the council, and so it's good.
And what it does do fundamentally is any properties that we do manage to return to the housing stock, it enables those people that are on the waiting list and have been on the waiting list for some significant time to actually have a home.
Yeah.
rather than sometimes even some of the property generally we can get back is when people are not actually living at the property. You know, they may be living else. They could be subletting. They could just be living somewhere else with a partner, and they're trying to retain the property as a bolt home, which is a luxury that Waverley just cannot afford to be allowing people to have that. And again, obviously, those type of cases come down to the fact that they're not using the property as a main and principal home. So therefore, obviously, we have to then investigate and collect the information and evidence to support that case before we can either present it to the tenant, or if they say, well, yes, I'm still living there, we can, in actual fact, by that time we would have provided them with notice to quit, and therefore we then go through the court process. So it can be quite a lengthy process.
At what point did you say that the housing benefit for all transferred to a central function?
Probably about 4 or 5 years ago.
Oh, it was a while ago.
Yeah.
Because I mean, the thing that stands out to me here is the value per case of the 3 months that the quarter of the year that we've had so far. I mean, it's a very significant figure in relation to the value per case of the preceding years. It seems to me. It's a tremendous justification for the existence of the operation.
What I was going to point out in this year's figures, just 2 lines above that, you'll see there we have NFI exercise.
Yeah.
As part of the Surrey County Fraud Partnership, which we're a member, because basically this is a report I provide to Surrey County Fraud Partnership, because Surrey County Fraud Partnership, as we're the coordinators, and basically we then feed that information in, and then they can then see actually as all authorities that are party to that partnership as to how much savings there has been. And the decision was made at this April that we would then, as we're not part of the DCLG funding, it's actually looking more at any type of fraud that we identify, but we decided we'd then include the NFI information, where we've actually done, because we do data matching, where we do a lot. It's very resource intensive, but in this particular year there's been a lot of cases where we've been able to withdraw them from our waiting list, our housing waiting list, and that has been mainly due to the fact the data that was held by the housing service, some of it unfortunately was out of date because a lot of people had died. So therefore, when people have died, obviously they're not going to be wanting to have a house, but we do investigate each case to actually verify, yes, they are still applicable to be on the housing waiting list. So that's where, on that figure, you can see there was 258,000. And bearing in mind the figures that figures that accumulate are actually based on figures that are set nationally by the Cabinet Office. So they say if you recover a property, in effect, it's going to be application withdrawn is just over £3,000. But in previous years, because again the Cabinet Office changed the figures, it used to be £18,000. So they've reduced. If you're taking somebody off the housing waiting list, it's now only £3,000. But of course, that's quite a lot of £3,000 that we've identified to accumulate the 258,000. So that was like a one big exercise that we have done to actually make sure that the information that we hold regarding our housing waiting list is accurate. Because again, that information is then used when people are projecting how many people do we have waiting for a house. So it's fundamentally important that we actually get not just the house, but we actually fundamentally get the statistics right for people to make decisions on further down the line.
Chairman, so a quick question about these questions of fraud or attempted fraud, is that correct?
Yes, yeah.
I mean, how many of these lead to criminal prosecutions? Do any do?
Yes, they do actually. We've initially we didn't have that many, but we are finding now probably even this month I think we've got 4. 2 have already gone to court, and we'll get another 2 coming through the court process. Whereas last year we probably even had 2 in totality. But those 2 were in effect long, lengthy cases. In one particular case, the tenant had said he'd lived at the property for 13 years and he hadn't been at the property for 13 years. There was no water usage for 13 years. We were able to provide evidence that he hadn't been there, and we were fortunate enough, we did get that property back. So previously it was not very many went through the court process, now there seems to be more going through the court process.
Why do you think that is?
So, I was going to say, and that's a statutory offence that would be the prosecution of which would be financed by the CPS, rather than a quasi-private landlord recovering property to which it's entitled.
That's, but I was going to say, the general at the moment, we haven't had a criminal, it's been civil. It goes through the civil courts.
Right.
So therefore we have to go to the magistrate court. But we have to go through a very stringent process to enable. A, we have to have the evidence obviously has to be compiled, just in a similar way that the police would do under interviews under pays, sometimes we would have to caution.
But a civil offence is financed by the parties involved.
Well, generally,
Defendant, plaintiff and defendant.
Because it's a breach of tenancy.
yeah, it's a breach of tenancy.
Yeah, that's what most of these are.
Well, I was
Because
really
generally we
the
don't
cost
find
of the exercise. That was,
Yeah, because generally well again you have to weigh the cost of the exercise against the fact that you get the property back.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the balance we have to make. That's why initially there wasn't that many that we would go through to that length. It would only generally be the exception. But now, because again, I don't know whether it's because people are saying no, I want to keep my property, but in actual fact the evidence is so strong against them that basically the judge has, in the cases that have gone recently, have gone to on our side as Waverley to say that yes, you can have the property back.
So this case, the chap was over 13 years, so he paid rent.
No,
So it was.
he didn't pay rent because he was getting housing benefit. So as he was having the housing benefit paid, he wasn't actually paying out for the rent. And that's obviously, and the other side of that is after we completed our case, we then had to, we provided the information to the DWP, and it would then be up to them to actually prosecute him regarding the housing benefit element.
Unfortunately, there are websites out there that help people work the system and get around all of this. And so this resource actually, some of these take quite a while to get through. But A, there's a matter of principle, B, there's a matter of public property, and there's a deterrent effect because we always advertise the outcomes when we prosecute, and through the tenants' newsletters, we make sure that it goes in there because we want there to be a deterrent effect. And it does help that the officer is a rugby playing ex-South African policeman.
He's very tenacious.
He's tenacious, yes.
But he is tenacious, but he complies by the his investigative code.
Yeah, sorry.
They was accusing. Always a hand back, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't think you'd need much of a code if you just stood at your front door, probably filling it.
Yes.
Jim? Are there any lessons or any things the organisation should be worried about in the high total financial value for the first quarter of this year? Because you compare that with the previous year, which was actually very low, whereas as far as I can see, we didn't actually have any financial value delivered during the fourth quarter of last year. Sorry, you won't have to see this, but I fished out an old report, so the number for M3Q last year is the same as the end of year. So, and yet this year we've got 400,000 already in one quarter, which if that carries on is going to be double the total that we've had in previous years. So have any particular causes been identified that the organisation should be worrying about?
Well, I think maybe I've mentioned one of the causes is because last year you didn't have the NFI figure in there, which is 258,000, and also within there we have a one-off, hopefully a one-off, at the moment anyway. We had a disabled facilities grant that basically it was investigated, it was deemed not appropriate to provide, and that was 55,000. And as I mentioned previously, the Cabinet Office have actually changed the threshold values, where the top line where social housing fraud and you see their financial value is 93,000, and whereas before from the Cabinet Office it was 18,000. So therefore, what we have to take into account is the fact that the Cabinet Office has changed the figures, and we've obviously adopted those figures as a consortium and Surrey County Fraud Partnership. We have to take that into account.
Yes, I think it was an orange, isn't it?
So in some ways, actually, last year's not comparing
It's fine. It's a good answer.
apples and pears at the moment.
What does the 93,000 actually mean?
Well, 93,000, that is the value that the Cabinet Office say for a tenancy recovered. When we've recovered a tenancy, they say that's the value that they published in their most recent stats that,
Right.
that we the councils are allowed.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sort of a notional amount, isn't it?
Yes, it's a notional
because
amount,
it's-
yeah.
it's about-
They come up with the calculation.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like even with the right to buy. The right to buy figure used to be the right to buy value that the local authorities such as Waverley, because obviously for London it's a much higher right to buy value, but now they've actually changed that down, because our right to buy value used to be 18,900 off the top of my head, and now they've actually reduced that down to 72,000. We felt by using the Cabinet Office figures, it would enable us if and when we needed to go to court, that we could actually convey to whoever's hearing the case, we would say this is what our figures are based on.
Notice in the Grant Thornton report, you mentioned the debts, £500,000 of debt in this area, which about half, if I remember right, didn't have a debt recovery plan. You've made some comment to that.
Right, yes.
How is that progressing? Have we improved that aspect of the debt recovery?
We're improving it. It's in Peter's area, and so it's slightly different from this in that they're not fraudsters. That was actually homeless placing homeless families with rent deposits, and it was avoiding temporary accommodation. So
you said it's a separate area. The debt recovery there is just
yes,
the rent.
it is. But no, it's a good question, Chairman, and I can actually get Peter to feedback on that, because we took the observation on Peter's put a strategy in place since, and we've employed somebody as well to strengthen that area and at source. But they're inherently tricky to recover because you are dealing with people with not much financial means, otherwise they wouldn't be in that predicament in the first place. So one hopes that placement enables them to go on and find something more permanent. That doesn't necessarily mean unpaid employment somewhere. So there's this debt that's hanging around for some time.
Thank you. Any more questions on this item? In that case, the recommendation, it is recommended that the Audit Committee notes the success of the fraud investigation activity.
Really?
Thank you. Next item is risk management. Graham, introduce this item.
So this won't take very long, Chairman. This is just really to tell you what's around the corner. So in November we'll be bringing some reports to the Audit Committee led by Peter. But in the meantime, we're looking to run sessions with the Audit Committee members offline, as we talked about last time, on the policy that we have that was developed in conjunction with the Audit Committee over the years, and also to go through our strategic risk registers as well in the light of the new corporate strategy that's been agreed by the Council. And the second aspect of it is around risk appetite. Peter's touched on that before. Probably we'll have an invite to a session of one sort or another. It will be facilitated around risk appetite, and the Council has an agreed statement on risk appetite. Many things aren't precise sciences, but it went through a process facilitated by an expert in the field with the Audit Committee members and executive members, really just testing where members and the senior management team as well are comfortable across a number of different realms. And if nothing else, it generates some interesting discussion. around the appetite for taking risks across, given it's a pretty complex organisation, we do so many different things here with lots of inherent risk and lots of sort of accepted risk as well. So just really just giving you the heads up on what's coming up in an area of the Audit Committee's work actually. So there's quite a bit over October and November on risk. Hopefully, the members that attend those sessions will find it quite interesting. You're always talking about sort of negative. You're talking about what could go wrong and what prevents you from achieving something. But sometimes that sort of different lens of looking at a problem or how to run a service can just bring a different perspective. So the times we've done it before, members have found it really interesting, and then we've tried to sort of capture it in a statement, and then we've taken that through the executive. So I'd say certainly go with that part of it, but when the nuts and bolts of the Audit Committee's work is really about the framework for managing risk. It's only a sort of 4-page document, and the risk registers as well, and that tends to generate quite a lot of discussion and debate that's all healthy. So that's on its way.
Okay. Any questions about this? No, thank you.
Nice change from the numbers. No more accounts for a while.
Item 13, annual governance statement, consideration of potential governance issues. Again, Graham, would you like to introduce this?
So the annual governance statement, the committee agreed at its last meeting, which set out the framework that's in place. And the Audit Committee some time ago said, well, as part of that, we don't want to do that as just as an annual event. We want to have the ability to raise any governance matters that might arise in the between meetings, or they may not. And so there's some guidance here that Amy's put into the agenda papers on page 73, just as a prompt, because what we found in the past, members will raise things, and sometimes they would clearly be governance things. Sometimes, actually, there'd just be a concern about a local issue, or planning application, and things like that, which actually wasn't necessarily to do with governance, which is what this committee is about. It was more about a planning committee function, or indeed an executive function. So people say, well, how did we procure the waste contract? Well, you can explain the process. Then if that turns into a governance concern, that's fine, we can note that. If it's just, well, I didn't like the outcome because I don't like that contractor, well, that's something else, that's more a scrutiny function of an executive decision actually. So the guidance is here to help members to sort of channel proper governance areas into the discussion. And it might be that members say, no, not aware of anything that's come up since our last meeting, and then we move on. But the item's going to be on every agenda to give members the opportunity to raise something. So I think it's very open to them.
Is this an area where issues like, as an example, the overspend, let's say on the Memorial Hall project in Farnham, is this something we should be taking here in this committee?
So the overspend itself would be a matter for scrutiny to hold the executive to account over. That's an executive function. I think if you felt that there was a governance issue around Waverley's management of projects, that certainly could be something that you could trigger a deeper dive into that area. Particularly if members are saying, well, actually, that happened on another project as well, and you can see some themes coming through, then I think now's the time to raise those. I think that the fact that there was an overspend and that was reported and it was authorised, if you like, that it's gone through the executive and the scrutiny process, ultimately went to full council in March this year. But I think if members of this committee, so I wonder if there's a deeper governance issue around financial control and management of the project, that's something that we could note down under this heading, as opposed to just the fact that it overspent. So there's a distinction there.
I mean, I think personally, because I wasn't here when the decisions were made,
Okay.
I would like personally to know what the background is to all that.
Sure. Okay.
But other members you have the same view? I mean, Richard, you were around at the time.
So I've seen it, a lot closer quarters, and there was some discomfort in our ability to manage contractors at the time of that particular event. And that was all brought forward. There was a lot of discussion, members of the audit committee that were involved in the executive. So there's nothing hidden, but at the end of the day, we're not an organisation that does a huge amount of high-value construction projects, and therefore you're not going to keep the expertise on the books. You've got to go outside. So there may be something there because there will be high-value construction projects coming up. Potentially Cranley Leisure Centre, if we're lucky. And being sure that we can go into that with the right mindset, there may be a learning opportunity here, which is what this is all about.
Thank you, Richard.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, these sort of things really are what I would term projects. And my concern would be that do we have in place a proper project management processes to ensure that things meet their schedule, meet the quality of the delivery, and the benefits which that investment has promised. I'm not sure whether we have that. I'm not sure whether the value for money or the scrutiny committees have that available to them. So a comparison when something is completed as to whether it's completed on time, within budget, and possibly a year after it's completed, whether the projected benefits are actually being accrued.
Okay.
And I'm not sure that, well, I really don't feel confident that's in place.
Sure, I'd agree with that, yes.
Chairman, I'm just going on from that, thank you. It's really, where's the evidence that it was in place? I suppose that's that, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Because that's, if you've got a process, fine, you've got a process, but
Yeah.
it's actually the evidence that's been complied with and it meets the principle of that particular process, isn't it?
And whether, we can, if you have something like sort of what in my earlier job career is a post-implementation review, what learning lessons have you got for the future
Yeah.
in particular?
So, Chair, if I can refer all colleagues to a value for money overview and scrutiny committee review that was carried out a couple of years ago now, I suppose. It looked at a lot of these issues, and there were a lot of action items arising from that, so it might be worth digging that out. We went through all of the, I was part of it, so an interest in this, but systematically we were underspending on our project, on our capital spend each year. Monies were getting rolled over, so there was a concern that project management wasn't tight enough to deliver in the year, and it was disrupting the budgeting process. So that was looked at in quite a lot of detail. There were a lot of recommendations, and I just refer colleagues to digging that report out as an opportunity to find out things that were identified at the time.
Chairman Gales very, very helpfully just sort of pointed me to page 56, so in the audit plan, and with the third one up, I think it completely fits with what you've just been saying.
And the enforcement.
Oh, sorry, management of major projects, lessons learned, Brightwell's in Memorial Hall.
Page 56.
Page 56, yeah, with the third one up in
Oh, third one up.
audit plan. So,
Yes.
so I think
It's Brightwell's to see that obvious one, yes.
So I think it looks like Gail's got it covered in the plan, and it's clear that members feel that the wider issue around project management, so that's absolutely fine. Yeah, we'll pick that up. So it's in there. I mean, obviously, if you said, look, in the light of the interested members, we want to ask Gail to try and accelerate that in the programme, then and we'll develop a review on the back of that audit. That might be the way of doing it, rather than trying to do it twice. So we're already down to commission, presumably the contractor Gail to do that one.
Yes.
I'm never happy with that. Yes. Good. Can we do that?
So see if we press on that one, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure if this is the correct venue for this, but I read that depending on what happened with our relationship with the European Union, there was a plan by central government to bulk up the amount of civil servants they had by recruiting from local authorities. Does anybody know anything about this?
No.
Because it seemed like
It was in the news.
a yellow
Oh, is it? Oh, really? Okay.
It wasn't recruiting,
No.
it was requisition, wasn't it? It was requisition. You will send
Oh.
down
Yeah, that's right.
100 people by tomorrow.
Yeah,
Carry on. Yes.
because they are going to be short, whichever the result, of a lot of civil servants. And I think the concern was that we'd be left with less than we needed
A lot less.
to run Waverley.
I haven't heard that one, John. You did.
No,
it's
absolutely
fascinating,
no
but
as
it's
well, but
obviously
yeah.
Yeah, that was in the press, yeah.
that's interesting. I don't know how the government could sort of enlist by force
Well,
local
they could probably
government
send
officers
a
with
bus down with
a load of salaries. I really got to. Okay, I haven't heard of that one actually.
Right. There'll be a picture of Boris Johnson face on with his finger pointing to the
Oh,
issue.
your country needs you.
Yeah. Okay.
Good.
So, can I
Yes.
just raise a comment here? With a lot of our governance issues, it's actually often quite hard to address them at the time they arise, because there are investigations going on, fraud as a prime example. The one that looks to have nearly reached a conclusion that we've all been very interested in but haven't been able to talk about was the air quality
Yeah.
issue. That's presumably now in a position where it can be talked freely about, and is it?
I can't remember the last communication from Tom to members on that actually. Can
It would be worth checking, because I think
Yes,
that is a
please.
government issue.
Andy
Governance
was leading
issue.
on that as opposed to me, and it did reach a conclusion. I remember Tom putting a note out. Don't know how widely that went out and whether that was a confidential.
Well, the person concerned was named.
Yes.
Yes, I think it's all out in the public
Yeah,
now
it's
because
in
there was an arrest made, or it was imminent, but I just haven't followed that through. So can I just check and then let
Yes.
you know on that one?
I think it is in the public domain. No.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether it's reached the court yet.
I think we put it.
But I think if I may, we should not refer to this to the media in any way, because it would be potentially biasing any subsequent judicial action which is taken.
Oh, yeah, that's precisely what I was asking.
But so
Yeah,
we
how
need, if
we've got-
we are alerted to what's been happening,
Yeah.
we need to ensure that we all put our fingers on that sort of confidentiality.
That's what I'm asking. But once it is in a position where we can talk about it openly, then there certainly will be lessons learnt which impact on governance, I think, is the point.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Brian. No more comments, recommendation. The committee is invited to raise any potential emerging governance issues for consideration. Agreed?
Agreed, yeah.
Item 14, audit committee to recurrent annual work programme, page 75 and 76. Have the committee any comments to make on this? We've actually mentioned one or two items already. Anything else? Any comment? No?
You only mean 75, don't you?
Page
Because
75,
one
yeah.
one
Yeah,
one
so
stage
75.
attention less blank, so
Oh, sorry, nothing wrong with
instead of something included in.
Minimal.
Yeah, it's good.
So in that case then, I'll just have the recommendation. The audit committee is invited to note its recurrent annual work programme. Agreed?
Agreed, yeah.
Thank you. Item 15, exclusion, not applicable.
No, indeed.
No issues to be considered in exempt session. Item 16. So that's it. Good. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.